This is CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Juliet Mann. Our top stories. A top-level summit between China and Germany begins in Berlin, with trade, climate change and Ukraine high on the agenda.
Our other headlines: 9 men make a second appearance at a court in Greece accused of masterminding last week's fatal migrant boat crossing.
US President Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, is expected to plead guilty to tax offences and admit to illegally owning a gun while he was a drug user.
And the United States Coast Guard widens its search area for a tourist submarine which went missing en route to explore the Titanic.
German Chancellor Olaf Scholz says his country opposes any forms of decoupling from China. He made the remarks at a meeting with China's Premier Li Qiang in Berlin.
The leaders discussed trade, the conflict in Ukraine and climate change, something both sides agreed to deepen their cooperation on. Well, let's talk to our correspondent Peter Oliver, watching events for us in Berlin. Peter, tell us more about today's meeting.
Yes, this phrase decoupling had been mentioned a few times in the lead-up to the meeting. Olaf Scholz, the German Chancellor, dismissing that out of hand. He did say there would be some diversification when it came to supply chains for Germany, but in no way would there be any removal or moving away from China when it came to Germany. And the reason for that is the $320 billion of trade that's done between the two countries. Germany and China are crucial trading partners. China is Germany's biggest trading partner, has been for the last 7 years, is on track to be Germany's largest trading partner for an 8th year in a row. Both leaders said that, well, they wanted to keep that this way. In fact, the message coming out of these talks were that it's good to talk, it's better to do it face to face. Both leaders said that they wanted to send more delegations to one another's capitals, to one another's countries for more face-to-face meetings, because this wasn't just a meeting between Olaf Scholz and Li Qiang. This was a meeting between the members of the respective cabinets to come together and look how the Chinese and German governments were going to go going forward, what they were going to do going forward. In one of the areas where they have an awful lot of potential for cooperation, it does seem, and where they really see themselves as wanting to be world leaders when it comes to cooperation, is on climate change. Here's what both leaders have to say.
The negotiation is pragmatic and efficient. We have made fruitful progress. We will jointly announce the initiative of negotiation mechanism over climate change and green transition. The two countries will also hold a new round of high-level economic and financial talks.
As major emitters of CO2, Germany and China have a special responsibility in the fight against climate change. We will face up to this responsibility together.
Well, I think it's interesting that as the final point of him being in Berlin, or the final point of Li Qiang, the Chinese premier, being in Berlin, they went to the Sino-German Economic and Technological Cooperation Forum. It is a mouthful to say, but a very important meeting of business leaders here in the German capital. They were there for the closing ceremony, the focus being green technology. Both Olaf Scholz and Li Qiang giving a statement there about the ongoing importance of cooperation when it comes to putting investment into the latest green technologies.
Peter, thank you for that. Our correspondent Peter Oliver in Berlin.
China has remained Germany's largest trading partner for a 7th consecutive year. Let's take a look at the numbers. Now, trade between the two countries shot up to $320 billion in 2022. That's an increase of almost 20% year on year. Now, goods imported from China rose by a third. Germany's exports to China only increased about 3%, but that made Germany's trade deficit with China as high as $90 billion. Now, despite that, German companies invested a total of $12.5 billion in China in 2022. That's a record amount. car makers and chemical companies, those are the key international players in the Chinese market. In fact, Germany's 4 industrial giants, Volkswagen, BMW, Mercedes and the chemical multinational BASF, just them alone account for 1/3 of European direct investment into China. An increasing number of Chinese companies are venturing into the German market. They invested in 141 projects just last year. And that makes China the 4th largest source of foreign direct investment in Germany after the United States, Switzerland and the UK. Now, China still remains Europe's largest trading partner and is the biggest single market for Germany's well-established automotive sector, with BMW announcing that its plants in Shenyang are now the company's largest production centres worldwide. Our correspondent Natalie Carney reports from Munich.
China and Germany are driving ahead into a new era of cooperation. The mutual benefits in electric vehicle manufacturing and sales is setting new limits for the automotive sectors in both countries. Germany's BMW has seen sales of their EV models within China, the world's largest EV market, more than triple year on year. BMW will also begin manufacturing their Neue Klasse electric cars in China, along with the high-voltage batteries required for them, creating around 2,000 new jobs. At the same time, Europe has become the world's second biggest and fastest growing EV market. Chinese manufacturers such as BYD and Aiways are taking the opportunity to win over European drivers.
Chinese car brands accounted for less than 10% of the well over 1 million battery-powered EVs sold across Europe last year. However, come 2025, that's expected to increase to 15%, driven by affordability and a wide range of models.
In the first quarter of 2023, 28% of EVs imported into Germany came from China. The decision by the EU to ban the sale of new fossil fuel cars from 2035 will also drive up EV demand. Chinese EV experience, coupled with strict EU regulations, makes for a winning combination, says the Vice President of Overseas at Aiways, Alex Kloss.
These are fully engineered cars and very well-built cars. There is regulations in Europe which you have to fulfill. And the German market is actually a very, very demanding market. So just like German manufacturers have been able to enter into the Chinese market, you'll have the same thing likewise happen over here, to actually improve the total situation of battery electric vehicles around the world.
The same is true for EV support technology. Grazing has been supplying public fast charging stations for cars, trucks and fleets all across China for years. Now it is looking to capitalize on the fast-moving developments in Europe.
24 pieces of 30 kilowatts power modules. For Europe, it's a new market for us, and it's just starting to grow for the public charging stations, public charging market, and also the heavy commercial vehicles. So I think for grazing, it's our mission to provide a competitive product with high quality to the European market to speed up their e-mobility development.
As talks in Berlin attempt to pave the diplomatic road forward, both countries are benefiting from the growth in global EV demands and recognizing the mutual cooperation needed for the long road ahead. Natalie Carney, CGTN in Munich.
Erik Solheim is former Norwegian Climate and Environment Minister.
I think this is a most important visit because it comes after connections have been somewhat broken down by COVID. It comes at exactly the same time as Secretary Blinken from the US is visiting Beijing. And of course, we have to remember that Li Qiang, the new Chinese premier, he was the party secretary of Jiangsu, he was the party secretary of Shanghai. That's a lot of business, but it doesn't really have, as far as I know, kind of the personal connections to Western or other international leaders. So this is a first start of a long-lasting relationship with him for Western leaders.
You talk about the business relationship, but the slogan for Tuesday is acting sustainably together. It wasn't so long ago, though, that Germany was urging China to take greater responsibility on climate and be more ambitious when it comes to things like renewables. So where do you see them working more closely together?
that is kind of diplomatic ping pong. I mean, at this point of time, China is far ahead of Germany or indeed Europe when it comes to the environment technology. Look at the Shanghai Auto Fair in April. I mean, I think it came as an enormous surprise to Volkswagen and BMW and all the German brands how far China has come on electric vehicles. They're far, I mean, 60% of all electric cars in the world are now made in China. They're far ahead of Europe. But obviously, the most important is technologically exchange. It is for the companies to work together. This cannot be done by states. But this is for Siemens and the car makers of Germany, and from LONGi, the biggest solar company in the world in China, or BYD, which is now the biggest company in the world when it comes to electric vehicles, is to form partnership between these to drive technology forward and thus improve environment standards both in Europe and in China.
Now, Lee's trip comes as Germany is intensifying its efforts to de-risk from China. So how might that affect what comes out of these consultations?
Well, this started with the American slogan of decoupling between China and the West, and that is, of course, a recipe for disaster. And I think basically everyone knows that if you decouple, it will be economic downturn everywhere, and it will be also a road, unfortunately, towards conflict and, in the worst case scenario, war. De-risking is somewhat different because de-risking is not completely irrational. I mean, Chinese companies now basically fully control the value chains in critical areas like, say, electric batteries or solar panels. I mean, it's totally dominant by China. So it's not irrational for European companies to look into how it can make the value chain serve Europe better. But that's a policy which should have no anti-Chinese bias. I mean, Europe should do exactly the same versus the United States. I mean, European companies need more control over important value chains, and those de-risking can be done, but it should be done in a neutral fashion, not anti-Chinese, not anti-American, just to kind of protect European companies. And of course, it should always be done within the confines of the World Trade Organization, and with the aim that, yes, we de-risk, but the main avenue for the future is cooperation.
Qatar has signed a 27-year gas supply deal with China, the second in less than a year. China will purchase 4 million metric tons of liquefied natural gas annually from the Gulf country. It will also see a Chinese state-owned company taking an equity stake in Qatar's Eastern Expansion LNG project. The latest deal was reached by China National Petroleum Corporation and Qatar Energy. Saudi Arabia's new airline, Riyadh Air, is making its international debut at the Paris Air Show. The airline will start its commercial services in 2025. It plans to carry more than 100 million passengers and fly to more than 100 destinations by 2030. The Saudi startup ordered 39 Boeing jets in March.
Saudi Arabia and other oil-exporting countries say they're trying to play a bigger role in the fight against climate change.
New agreements on renewables and food security are the first results of this year's OPEC Fund Forum in Vienna. Our correspondent Johannes Pleshberger reports.
OPEC countries met with developing nations in Vienna to help them tackle some of the hurdles they face in bringing about a green transition. Prior to the event, the OPEC Fund pledged to finance renewable energy solutions with $250 million, raising hopes of progress among partner institutions such as the United Nations Office for South-South Cooperation.
Leading up to the COP28, there is also a lot of expectation from all sectors, including the oil sector. So having them engaged and leading on those forums and those discussions is extremely promising.
In February, OPEC urged countries to invest much more in oil to meet the world's future energy demand, saying more oil is needed to ensure energy security for all. At the same time, OPEC members say they want to be part of the green transition. This is where its separate international development organization, OPEC Fund, comes into play. One of the fund's top priorities is helping countries with limited resources to transition to greener sources of energy. Since 1976, the OPEC Fund has committed more than $22 billion of its resources in over 125 countries worldwide, with Saudi Arabia financing around a third of the fund's projects.
And hopefully this forum will bring about more multilateralism and cooperation between multilateral development banks, and you see that around.
Special guest speaker at the event was Bhutan's Prime Minister Lotay Tshering, who called on OPEC members to help his country transition to renewables.
This is the first time that Bhutan is participating in OPEC Fund organized events, so my expectation is to start on a very good understanding of our needs and priorities. So for us, as of today, would be investment in energy sector, renewable energy sector.
On Monday, the OPEC Fund signed an agreement with the World Food Programme to enhance global food security and build climate-resilient food systems.
We signed yesterday an MOU with the OPEC Fund to strengthen collaboration, especially on issues related to food systems. And that's where we hope to be working together with OPEC Fund and its partners to help countries strengthen their national food systems and also strengthen global food systems.
The OPEC Fund's climate projects are an important step towards green energy, which is gaining international acknowledgement. But the fact remains that its member countries are some of the world's biggest oil exporters, making them big contributors to greenhouse gases. Johannes Blechberger, CGTN, Vienna.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, 9 men make a court appearance in Greece accused of masterminding that migrant boat tragedy that ended in such horror.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliet Mann. Welcome back to Global Business Europe. 9 suspects accused of masterminding the failed migrant boat crossing in the Mediterranean last week have appeared in a Greek court.
The death toll from the disaster has risen to 81 people, with hundreds still missing. The accused men, all Egyptian nationals, are making a second appearance before the judges in Kalamata, where they face charges including manslaughter. Well, let's talk to CGTN's correspondent Evangelo Sipsas in Kalamata. Evangelo, a second day in court for those men accused. Talk us through what's happening today.
Well, right now, the last of the 9 accused people smugglers are testifying in front of a judge. It's been a long process that started at about 10 a.m. on Tuesday when all those 9 people arrived here in the Kalamata courthouse. Now, as you mentioned, they had to get a 24-hour extension as more information was surfaced over the weekend, which made their lawyers having to reevaluate what happened. Right now, as we speak, though, we haven't got any more information. The only thing that we know is that they deny any wrongdoing and that those 9 people claim that they were among those who paid a hefty amount to get on that boat to have a better life. Now, there's more information about the Coast Guard as well on those testimonies. We spoke to some of the lawyers yesterday and also to the Ministry of Migration, and this is what they had to tell us.
While this should be a day for celebrating and embracing those who have begun new lives,
This courthouse is a sad reminder that not everyone is lucky enough to pursue that dream.
My client says that on the boat more than 700 people were on board and he was with another 35 Egyptians. He left his village in Egypt looking for a better life in Europe, as he was facing many financial problems.
After having been given 24 hours to prepare the response to accusations that they commanded the fishing vessel, the 9 accused are testifying on Tuesday. But questions still remain over the response from the Hellenic Coast Guard and what responsibility the authorities should shoulder for the tragedy. Reports indicate that some of those on board did reject offers of assistance in the hope of pushing on to Italy. But testimonies from survivors indicate that the Coast Guard appeared reluctant to act until the very last moment. From their side, the Greek Ministry of Migration is calling for more EU unity.
We have received funds to combat this issue, but we need more solidarity. To exist, there must be a common European framework for asylum, return and integration. As long as this does not exist, we're doing what we have to do to carry out our humanitarian duty and protect our country.
As the testimonies continue alongside with the grim task of recovering the bodies, the blame game continues. What exactly happened the day that the boat sank is not yet known, but the head of the Hellenic Council for Refugees is worried that the handling of this case repeats errors of the past.
For the moment, the authorities, the Coast Guard, whom every day put something in because there was no rope, suddenly there was a rope. There was no rescue attempt, suddenly there is a rescue attempt. All this is relevant and reminds us a repeat of a very bad case in which Greece has unfortunately been recognised as responsible.
So far this year, hundreds of thousands have tried to cross to Europe via sea or land, hoping for a new life. Those who crowded onto the unstable fishing vessel in Libya will know different. And like so many others before them, those hopes have ended in the worst imaginable tragedy. And on Monday night, 2 more bodies were recovered, bringing the death toll up to 81, now prompting the Hellenic Coast Guard to extend those rescue and search operation. Now that has turned more into a recovery one, as most of the people out in still are presumed dead. Now on Tuesday night, the Hellenic Coast Guard with the local authorities will sit down to have a meeting whether the operation will extend or not.
Evangelo, thank you for that. Our correspondent Evangelo Sipsas in Kalamata in Greece.
When Ukrainian refugees fled their homes following the invasion, most of them had to leave their hopes and dreams when it came to their careers.
But one young athlete was given the chance to pick up where he left off with help from his new home country. Our correspondent Pablo Gutierrez reports now from Budapest.
Dmitry Nazarenko almost gave up on his dream of becoming a professional football player. Before the Ukraine conflict broke out, the 19-year-old athlete played midfield with the Mariupol Football Club. But when the war came to his city, everything changed.
When the fighting started, I stopped thinking about my plans for the future. I just tried to survive. Thank God that my family is alive and well, and I can see them. That's the most important thing.
Dmitry says the day he fled Mariupol was the worst day of his life. His home had just been shelled while he hid in the basement with his family. Luckily, everyone survived the attack. It was at that moment he knew he had to leave. He left for Donetsk with his girlfriend, and after a month there, they traveled through Russia until they finally reached Budapest.
His story has touched many people in Hungary, so I was the one who started to search for a sponsor, a supporter for him, and it was really not difficult.
Christoph Gash is the deputy president of the Hungarian Interchurch Aid Group. Since the conflict began, they've helped over 100,000 Ukrainian refugees in Hungary. When Gash learned about Dimitri's story, he immediately helped them secure a private donation that covered his monthly expenses and introduced him to soccer clubs in Hungary. One of them, MOL Fehérvár FC, recruited him.
From the moment I arrived in Budapest, this organization helped me, gave me housing and an opportunity to keep playing football.
The first weeks with the club were tough. There was a language barrier, and lack of training had taken a toll on his fitness level. But he played on until an injury sidelined him.
Dimitri has not lost hope or focus. The second chance he has received here in Hungary to play the game he loves is on pause right now due to an injury. But he says soon he will be back out on the field, ready to score again.
Play-by-play, Dimitri remains determined to tackle challenges on and off the field.
I think his story has a very important message about, carrying on and continuing, chasing a dream and being strong.
But there is one dream, Dimitri says, that is still out of reach, and that is to play once again in his hometown, to return to the time when fans crowded the stands and there was peace. Pablo Gutierrez, CGTN, Budapest.
The Greece migrant boat disaster came less than a week ahead of World Refugee Day.
Tuesday is the 72nd anniversary of the signing of the United Nations Refugee Convention in the year 1951. Last year, the number of refugees globally surged past 35 million, rising by 8 million over 12 months. More than half of those come from 3 countries: Syria, Ukraine and Afghanistan.
Matthew Saltmarsh is from the United Nations High Commission for Refugees. Thanks for coming on the programme. It does seem extraordinary, though, to be marking Refugee Day every year, year on year, with seemingly no prospect of the world solving the refugee crisis.
That's right. I mean, World Refugee Day is a time when we really reflect on the plight of refugees, but also when we think about the contributions that refugees make to society and the amazing support that is given to refugees around the world, whether that's in less well-resourced countries or whether it's in richer countries. But behind that, as you mentioned, the figures are rising, and they have been rising for more than a decade. So that also tells us that we have a major problem with forced displacement in the world, and that the international community is not doing enough to address those problems right now.
So what could the UN do more? I mean, is the United Nations now simply a reactive organisation?
Well, of course, there's humanitarian assistance, and ourselves and other partners within the UN do a lot of that. We're doing that with Sudan now. There was a pledging conference yesterday that raised 1.5 billion in funds that are urgently needed to support those people who have fled Sudan or those who are trapped inside Sudan. So there is that aspect. But of course, we also try to look further ahead and try to find solutions for refugees. And later this year, we have a big event in Geneva called the Global Refugee Forum, and that will bring together a number of different actors, including governments, UN, refugees themselves, but also private sector, civil society and other organizations. And what we're hoping from that is that all these different groups can come together and try to find solutions for refugees. Maybe not a global solution for refugees, but solutions in different parts of the world that can help refugees to rebuild their lives or to find safe passage to places where, they can rebuild their lives in safety and dignity.
So you're bringing all the stakeholders together there. But, there is a bit of an irony here, isn't there, Matthew, about Europe's so-called migrant crisis? Because there are refugees who are dying just on their way to Europe, but the continent has really deep labour shortages in so many different sectors.
Yeah, I mean, in Europe, it's a complicated picture. Let's not forget that just last year there was a huge open-door policy towards Ukrainian refugees. Many millions of them are now hosted across Europe. They were given a warm welcome. They were given access to services, to schools, to health, to education, to labour markets. And that really is a very, very positive model. And that's also been replicated in other parts of the world, in parts of Africa, in Kenya, for example, but also in parts of Latin America, in Colombia. So that's a very positive thing. On the other hand, of course, there is an issue. We have a lot of people who are moving in what we call mixed flows, so migrants are moving with refugees and asylum seekers, and particularly acute in Africa, where it's extremely dangerous, the journeys that they're taking. And of course, just recently, we've seen that can end in tragic results, as it did with the boat that went down just off Greece.
Matthew Saltmarsh from the United Nations High Commission for Refugees. Thank you very much.
Let's take you to the United States now, where President Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, will plead guilty to 2 federal crimes of willfully failing to pay taxes. And he's admitted an illegal gun purchase while he was a self-confessed drug user. Let's talk to our correspondent, John Terrace, watching events for us in New York. John, just talk us through the significance of this.
Yes. Well, Jamie and Juliet, you should understand this is now the big lead story in all of America. It was a quiet day today, and then suddenly this dropped into the news wires, and we couldn't believe it. Once again, America is making legal history. Last week it was President Trump who became the first former president to be charged with a federal crime, and now the first child of a sitting United States president has admitted to a federal crime. Now, other children in the past have caused their fathers headaches while they've been in the White House, scandals even, but we've never had one admitting to a federal crime before. Now, it's important to understand that Joe Biden has 4 children. One of them was a little girl called Naomi who died in a car crash back in 1972. 2 sons, Beau and Hunter, and another daughter with his present wife, the First Lady Jill, whose name is Ashley. Beau died a couple of years ago of cancer. The president never stops talking about him. He raises him at every moment possible. And the son that we're talking about today is Hunter Biden. Now, Hunter is 53 years old now, and he has reached a plea deal with the authorities in the state of Delaware, which is where the Biden family is from. And basically, this plea deal avoids him going to jail. So he will not serve jail time for these admitted crimes. I think it's fair to say that these are relatively low-level crimes. One is possession of a gun, and then there are 2 counts of tax avoidance. Hunter Biden, when he appears, which I assume he will have to before the authorities, when he does that, it won't be today, it'll be sometime in the next month or 2. When he does that, we're expecting him to cite his addiction years when these 2 crimes are alleged to have taken place. Well, he's admitted to them when they did take place. He was addicted to pills and also to alcohol. And my understanding is that the case regarding the gun will be closed if he completes a 2-year probation. Juliet and Jamie?
You describe them as low-level crimes, John, but what's the wider background to all of this?
Well, it's very important that our viewers understand that this plays into the deeply partisan and very, very bitter political circumstances and the political season as we build up to the next election that we find ourselves here in the United States. And it may even affect the 2024 presidential election. President Trump is already campaigning and is the Republican frontrunner. And Joe Biden began his campaign for the White House only last weekend with a speech in Philadelphia. Now, the thing is, the Republicans are outraged that their guy, President Trump, has been charged now on 2 occasions. And as they see it, no charges for the former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, who they accuse of crimes, and Hunter Biden until this point. But there's more. Republicans go further. They accuse Hunter Biden of shenanigans regarding a laptop, business interests in Ukraine, and receiving foreign money from various countries. Now, it's true to say that those things, the laptop and the business interests, are not included in this deal which has just been done. But there is a 5-year criminal probe going on into what happened regarding Hunter Biden's business deals. There have been and there will now be more hearings into this in the Republican-controlled House of Representatives. Those will be stepped up. And as for the president, well, he has already called on several occasions his son Hunter troubled, although he's gone out of his way to include him in as many events as possible at the White House and while he's been traveling as President of the United States. He's presently in the West Coast. He's there on a fundraising tour, and we're not expected to hear from President Biden until the 20 GMT hour, which is 4 hours from now. So we'll see then whether he mentions anything about it.
John, thanks for that. Our correspondent, John Terrace in New York.
Now, don't get ill in the United States. Medical debt is burdening nearly 1 in every 10 adults in Los Angeles County.
Health authorities estimate residents' total medical debt is more than $2.6 billion, and that even those with insurance still face financial problems. Our correspondent, Adis Tianshan, reports.
Louis Watts is grateful his wife was diagnosed with cancer at a time they happened to be in Argentina last year. He says the price tag for her recovery isn't something they could afford in the United States.
Surgery and chemotherapy, radiation treatment, MRIs, private hospitalization for a prolonged period of time. And the total cost came to about $10,000, and that was out of pocket with no insurance. And the medical care was excellent. The same care, if she'd had to do the same thing here in the United States, probably would have been $80,000, $100,000.
As a result, medical debt is becoming increasingly more common among Americans. According to new research from Los Angeles County's Public Health Department, nearly 810,000 of its residents carry an estimate of more than $2.6 billion in medical debt as of 2021. That means 1 in 10 adults living in LA County is burdened with medical debt, forcing some people to delay their medical needs.
And people do tell us they choose not to come in or wait to come in until they absolutely have to. And it often makes a condition that would be more easily handled, it turns into a chronic condition. Their deductibles are so high, their co-pays are so high or with each visit that they have chosen to eat and pay rent and their mortgage rather than seek medical care.
Among those with outstanding medical bills, 50% reported taking on credit card debt to finance medical bills, and 46% said they were unable to afford basic necessities like shelter or food due to their bills. Researchers have also found that having private medical insurance coverage does not necessarily shield people from plunging in debt.
Well, it doesn't at all, because the insurance companies fight tooth and nail against making payments in many cases, and they have so many exclusions that they can sort of wiggle out of paying. And so a lot of people are left with having to try to go with GoFundMe programs and making appeals over the internet and on Facebook for donations to help them pay for care.
The latest findings by the Los Angeles County reflect on a wider national problem where medical debt has become the largest source of debt in collections, more than credit card, utilities, and car loans combined, and one of the leading causes of bankruptcy, leaving many like the Watts family to rely on health care abroad. It is Tianshan, CGTN, Los Angeles.
You can get highlights from the week's news in Europe and China direct to your inbox from CGTN's Storyboard email newsletter. Sign up at europe.cgtn.com/newsletter.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, US Coast Guards widen their search area in the hunt for a missing tourist submarine.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference. Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities, reinvent, find new opportunities, discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference. What do we mean when we talk about the difference?
Brazen acts.
The difference is in the detail, the background,
defense ministers from
the wider angle and perspective of every story. Wherever the story may be. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and me, Juliet Mann. Our top stories. A top-level summit between China and Germany has begun in Berlin, with trade, climate change and Ukraine high on the agenda.
Our other headlines: 9 men make a second appearance at a court in Greece accused of masterminding last week's fatal migrant boat crossing.
US President Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, is expected to plead guilty to tax offences and admit to illegally owning a gun while he was a drug user.
A major international search and rescue operation is underway to try to find a submarine which has gone missing en route to explore the wreck of the Titanic off Newfoundland in Canada.
The US Coast Guard says the search has been expanded into deeper waters for the Titan, which was carrying tourists to the wreck. It lost contact about an hour and 45 minutes into the dive on Sunday.
Well, the submersible has a 96-hour oxygen supply, which the experts estimate now gives the 5 passengers on board 2 days of life support left. CGTN's correspondent Mark Webster has the story.
What is making this rescue even more difficult is that once the submersible is underwater, it has no means of communicating with the surface. The dive would normally take up to 8 hours, including the long descent and resurfacing, plus time circling the ship's remains, which lie nearly 4,000 metres below the Atlantic Ocean. Rescuers have deployed aircraft and search vessels using underwater sonar equipment in their efforts to find the submersible. But the wreck is nearly 1,500 kilometres off Cape Cod on the US coast, and those coordinating rescue attempts say it's an extremely difficult environment.
It is a remote area, and it is a challenge to conduct a search in that remote area. But we are deploying all available assets to make sure that we can locate the craft and rescue the people on board.
The 5 who are in the vessel include a Pakistani businessman and his son, a British billionaire, a French explorer, and the CEO of the company operating the trips, Stockton Rush. Tickets for the 8-day expedition to see the Titanic on the seabed cost $250,000 each. Rush has warned would-be travellers in the past that there would be no guarantee they would get to see the ship and that it was a dangerous environment. Those who have made the journey say the dangers are well known.
Deep submersible diving is very dangerous, but it's high tech, and as each year goes by, the equipment gets better, the technology gets better, and so on. So I'm very hopeful and very positive. I was in the sub for 12 hours. We have our own breathing system on board.
The Titanic has exercised a fascination for marine experts and the general public ever since it set sail on its maiden voyage to New York in 1912. After it hit an iceberg on that trip, the supposedly unsinkable ship broke in two as it sank to the bottom. Of the 2,200 passengers and crew on board, more than 1,500 died. The wreck was located in 1985, having lain undisturbed for 73 years. But experts say, such is the power of the Titanic story, that adventurers and the merely curious can't leave it alone, whatever the dangers. Mark Webster, CGTN.
Simon Boxall is a senior lecturer in oceanography at the University of Southampton. Thank you for coming on the show. Now, time is running out. What are the key challenges, would you say, the rescue mission's facing now?
Well, assuming that the submarine is still intact, which we all hope it is, the first thing is they've got to locate it. We don't know whether it's snared on something, whether it's hit some technical problems, whether it's sitting on the seabed. And although the search area isn't huge, they knew where it went in. It can't travel that far. It hasn't got very powerful motors. But there's still a significant search area given the timescale we have. Once it's been found, the next challenge is how do you get it back to the surface? Again, that's not trivial. It's not so much a question of it would be a problem in, say, 20, 30, 40, 50 meters of water. But we're talking here about nearly 4 kilometers. Ships with that sort of cabling, with that sort of capability, are very rare. There is, I understand, a cable laying ship which has arrived on scene now, which is helping the search. It has specialized ROVs for cable laying, but even that only has a capability really down to 3,000 meters. So, you know, we're talking about maybe a handful of ships worldwide that can do this. But they're not all sitting around Newfoundland at the moment.
It sounds like the best chances of survival there might be if it's floated up to the surface somehow.
Yes, I mean, these things are equipped with various fail-safe mechanisms in theory. So they can sort of lose ballast, like a balloon can lose sandbags and things to float. They can do the same thing with this thing. And you then want to ask the question of why hasn't that happened so far? So is it snagged on the seabed somewhere, in which case, you know, it may well be they don't have enough power to unsnag it or to sort of rip it away from what it's been snared on. And you can't get out. I mean, you know, we know that it's already sealed at the surface, but there's no point in being able to get out anyway, because the pressures down there would crush you within a second. So it's a really perilous situation.
Can you give us an idea of what conditions might be like for the crew on board this submarine?
Apart from being terrified, it's going to be cramped. You know, people talk about this being about the size of a sort of a small van with the seats taken out, uncomfortable. Fine if you're going down for, you know, 4 or 5 hours, 6 hours, the adventure, the excitement, keep the adrenaline going. If you're down there for 12, 24, 46 hours, then it starts to get uncomfortable. It'll get quite warm down there. There is heating on the system to stop the cold temperature around the ocean causing problems inside. But, of course, if they're stuck down there for the length of time, those bodies, the electronics on board, will tend to warm the whole thing up. And so, you know, basically, if you can imagine you're stuck in a small van with no facilities at all for 2, 3 days, 4 days, you can start to imagine the problems they're going to start hitting. The key one, of course, is they are running out of oxygen, and that's the lifeline.
The search area has been expanded. Where is this submarine most likely to be? You mentioned before that it doesn't have a huge range, but where could it be?
Well, it doesn't have a huge range, but of course, as time goes on, ocean currents could also move it, unless it's sitting on the seabed. And it'll be down there, and I think the problem is that people assume that we can see it very quickly. You can't see through the ocean. You can't use radar. You're using sonar systems that sweep the seabed. But of course, you're in an area which is, by definition, a wreck area. So there's all kinds of parts of the Titanic scattered across the seabed. You're trying to pick up this very, very small target amongst this huge ship. And so, you know, it is literally looking for a needle in a haystack. The haystack's the Titanic, and the submersible is the needle, which is fine if you've got days or weeks or months even to try and find it. They've got hours, and this is the big problem. And getting the right equipment out there to do these deep sea sonar surveys, again, is a problem. You know, they are 2 days away from the nearest port. And they are using aircraft at the moment, using airborne sonar systems. But they are very limited in what they can do. They're designed really for looking at sort of military submarines in the near surface. They don't go anything like that deep. So, you know, the challenges are there in terms of technology, and the clock is ticking.
It certainly is. Simon Boxall, thank you very much for your insight and explanation of what could possibly lie in store. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, Crossing Continents, the major new museum collaboration between Europe and China.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
Unprecedented scenes that we saw.
The clean-up operation is now well and truly underway.
Parts of southern Europe remain in a state of emergency.
Context gives meaning. People make history.
far more than 1,000 people have come here today.
But authorities are still on high alert.
So into the attention of world leaders.
A complex world demands a comprehensive view.
But with the cleanup efforts more or less under control,
the economic impact is bound to ripple across the country.
There's plastic pollution everywhere.
Because the world today matters for your world tomorrow.
This is the living area of the crew.
And in these mountains, they recently finished building a power plant.
Well, this is something completely different.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. Ukraine says it shot down 28 out of 30 Russian drones launched on Kyiv overnight. Ukrainian forces described a massive air attack on the capital and the city of Lviv by Iranian-made drones. Air raid alerts were also sounded in the city of Zaporizhzhia. Meanwhile, US President Joe Biden says the threat of Russia using nuclear weapons is real. Biden was speaking days after Russia admitted deploying tactical missiles to Belarus, which he called absolutely irresponsible.
4 Israeli settlers have been killed and 4 others wounded in a gun attack in the occupied West Bank. The shooting happened at the entrance to the illegal Eli settlement. 2 Palestinian gunmen are suspected of carrying out the attack. Israeli Defense Forces say the men opened fire at a petrol station. One of the suspects has been killed. It comes a day after 6 Palestinians were killed during an Israeli raid on the Jenin refugee camp.
The man has been arrested following a series of attacks on customers at 3 Chinese restaurants in Auckland and New Zealand. A man wielding an axe entered the restaurants and began attacking people at random. 4 people were hospitalised, 1 has since been released and 3 others remain in a stable condition. The motive for these attacks is not yet known.
Romanian police have charged controversial social media influencer Andrew Tate with rape, human trafficking and forming an organised crime group to sexually exploit women. His brother Tristan and 2 female suspects are facing the same charges. The 4 who were arrested in Bucharest last year are being held under house arrest. They deny the accusations.
The Shanghai Futures Exchange has become an increasingly popular destination for UK investors. The exchange's Associate Director of International Cooperation and Business Development is here in London.
CGTN spoke to Yang Yiping to find out what products are attracting investors.
I believe UK investors are most interested in the international products that we have. For example, crude oil, bonded copper contracts. Last year, we had a 60% increase in trading volume and 86% increase in turnover on INE, our international platform. So making it the only exchange in China recorded a double-digit growth in the commodities world.
China is welcoming back major international exhibitions, including one in Beijing, co-designed by the Uffizi Galleries in Italy and the National Museum of China.
CGTN's correspondent Wang Suen has been talking to Ike Schmidt, director of the Uffizi Galleries.
Last time you visited China was in 2019, and now 4 years have passed. And how do you feel this time?
Oh, I'm so happy to be back after an interruption which was way too long. And I'm also happy to see the museum exhibitions are packed, and that's a very good sign. And of course, all the people who come to admire the Uffizi exhibitions, that's a particular element of pride and satisfaction. But also it shows us that we need to do more and go on into this direction.
The Uffizi Museum is one of the most prominent and historic art museums in the world, cooperation with the Bandung Art Museums, and also the plan for the 10 exhibitions in 5 years. What will this bring, and why is it important for both countries?
This is very important that we don't do just one show of the highlights and then go away. We wanted to have a stable relationship, and we were very pleased when Bandung Museum had the same intention. Well, let's just do 10 exhibitions. That way we are here basically on a permanent basis, but always with different offers, which means that who liked one exhibition might very well return to see another exhibition and learn more and more.
Both China and Italy have thousands of years of history and civilization, and the Renaissance period actually corresponds to the Ming Dynasty in China, and both periods are with splendid artwork. Looking ahead, how might the two countries create more opportunities for dialogue and exchanges?
In the Renaissance, in fact, there were already the very first cultural contacts via the Silk Road between Italy and China. We see this admiration for China already in the Florentine Renaissance. This is a relation that goes back centuries and centuries. And also Italy, just like China, is a country which has thousands of years of history and of tradition, and a moment where people really look actively back to the tradition and try to preserve it for the future and to combine it with innovation, just like in China.
Now, have you nodded off? It's time to wake up for this one. Researchers at the University College London say taking a regular afternoon nap is good for our brains and help them keep bigger for longer.
Scientists found that those who snoozed regularly had brains 15 cubic centimetres larger than those who didn't, which is equivalent to delaying ageing by 3 to 6 years. The brain naturally shrinks with age, while brain health is important for protecting against dementia and diseases like Alzheimer's.
The headlines again. A top-level summit between China and Germany begins in Berlin, with trade, climate change and Ukraine high on the agenda.
Our other headlines: 9 men make a second appearance at a court in Greece accused of masterminding last week's fatal migrant boat crossing.
US President Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, is expected to plead guilty to tax offences and admit to illegally owning a gun while he was a drug user.
And the United States Coast Guard widens its search area for a tourist submarine which went missing en route to explore the Titanic.
And that's it for Global Business Europe. Thanks for watching.
More on all of our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
And you can go to CGTN Europe's channel on the Telegram app or scan that QR code on the screen to get stories and updates sent direct to your phone.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all of the team in London, it's goodbye.
Goodbye.